She wasn't the type they expected to see at the counter asking for millions to move before morning. Just a black woman in an old navy tee, tote bag worn thin at the seams, eyes steady with something they mistook for audacity. They didn't bother to hide their smirks or lower their voices when they questioned if her ID was even real. It was supposed to be routine, just another day ensuring people like her remembered where they stood. But beneath that quiet patience was something they couldn't see coming, a promise waiting to be delivered with a cold precision of a corporate axe. By dawn, the same people who laughed would be scrambling to explain the gaping hole in their vaults and the wreckage of their reputation. This isn't about money. It's about who gets believed, who gets dismissed, and what it costs to find out too late you chose the wrong person to humiliate. If you want to see how it unfolds, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment about what you think and where you're watching from. Marilyn Boone pushed open the heavy glass door of Jefferson State Bank and felt the cold rush of air conditioning hit her face, the jingle of the overhead bell sharp and intrusive. She stepped in cautiously, adjusting the frayed strap of her faded canvas tote, the one she'd been meaning to replace for months, but couldn't justify the expense. She wore simple, no-nonsense clothes. Old navy jeans with fraying hems and a plain, loose-fitting navy t-shirt that showed the slightest wear at the seams. She hadn't even bothered with makeup that morning. Too focused on the numbers and transfer forms, she triple-checked before leaving the office. She was here on company business, though no one looking at her would know it. Her hair was pulled back into a frizzy, hastily gathered bun, and she caught a glimpse of herself in the glass door as it swung shut behind her. Dark, tired eyes, the hint of lines at the corners, and a stubborn set to her mouth that she tried to smooth into something neutral. The bank was busy, the lines snaking down the polished white floor tiles, men in expensive tailored suits chatting with irritation into Bluetooth earpieces, older women tapping their well-manicured nails on checkbooks. Even a cluster of teenage girls in matching athletic were giggling over TikTok videos. And Marilyn, in her plain clothes, stuck out just enough to feel it. She sighed quietly and stepped into the line, clutching the neatly organized folder with all the authorization forms she'd need for the transaction. It wasn't a small sum, it was millions, corporate investment capital needing to be transferred before end of day. She was the lead investment officer for Boone Strategic Partners, and this was her responsibility. The plan was to get in, get the authorization done, and get out before lunch. Easy, professional, routine. But even as she rehearsed the pitch-perfect words she'd use with the teller, calm, authoritative, polite, she felt her gut clench. Because it never went routine for her. Not here. Not in this branch. Not in this neighborhood. When the line finally shrank enough, she stepped forward to the window marked Clay. The teller didn't look up right away, his fingers tapping at his keyboard, his lips pressed in a thin line of concentration that Marilyn recognized as performative indifference. She waited a beat, then cleared her throat politely. Clay looked up, and the flicker of discomfort that crossed his face was fast, but not fast enough. His eyes dropped immediately to her clothes, her hair, the battered canvas tote. Then the smile clicked on, too bright, too forced. "Next," he said, voice clipped. Marilyn took a breath, stepped up to the counter, and handed over her driver's license and corporate documents with care. "Hi, I'm here to authorize a transfer on behalf of Boone Strategic Partners. The details are in here. I have ID and authorization forms." Clay took them, but rather than scanning them immediately, he lifted her ID card between two fingers, pinching it like something suspect. He turned it sideways, then upside down, holding it up to the harsh overhead lights as if expecting it to glow with the word fraud. "Marilyn Boone," he read slowly, voice deliberately loud. She felt the eyes on her immediately, heads turning in the line, the subtle hush that meant everyone was listening. "Yes," she said as steadily as she could. He didn't lower his voice. "Address says West Ridge Heights. That's fancy, isn't it?" He smirked slightly, then, more loudly, as if explaining to the room, "You sure you live there?" Marilyn felt her stomach drop. She forced her expression to remain neutral, aware of the snickers she could hear from behind her. She straightened her back. "Yes, that's my current address." Clay raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. He flipped her ID over again and again, then tapped the counter with it twice. Interesting. Real interesting. He turned halfway in his chair and called out, "Dina, can you come take a look at this? Got something weird." She made herself take slow, even steps across the shiny tile floor, the muted squeak of her old sneakers punctuating her humiliation. As she neared the counter again, she caught Clay watching her approach with open amusement, his arms folded and that smirk he wore like armor practically daring her to speak. She ignored him and focused on Dina Firth, who had returned from some back-office corridor with an air of importance that radiated superiority. Dina gave her a look that might have been mild curiosity if it wasn't so obviously condescending. "Back already?" she asked, voice dry. Marilyn's fingers tightened on the tote. She kept her tone controlled. "I'd like to know how long this will take. This is an authorized transaction. It's time sensitive." Dina made a show of exhaling through her nose, as though this was the worst kind of interruption. She snapped her fingers at Clay, who handed over Marilyn's ID like he was returning stolen property. Dina glanced at it again, tapping it against her palm, clearly enjoying the theater of it. "You know," she said slowly, voice pitched to carry just enough for the nearest customers to hear, "if you want to move that kind of money, you need to prove you even have it. Where's your income verification?" Marilyn blinked. For a moment, she wasn't sure she'd heard right. "What?" Dina rolled her eyes. "Income verification. Pay stubs. Tax records. Bank statements that match this address." I mean, she turned to Clay as though they were co-conspirators in some hilarious joke. Anyone can print a fancy address on a driver's license these days. Marilyn's mouth went dry. She tried to swallow the burn in her throat. "This is a business transaction. The authorization forms are from Boone Strategic Partners. I'm their lead investment officer. The money isn't my personal income." Dina tilted her head, pretending to be confused. "Executive? Really? Executive of what exactly?" She let the pause hang before delivering the punchline in a voice dripping with sarcasm. "A hair salon? A dog walking service? Please don't waste our time." Marilyn's breath hitched. She wanted to shout. She wanted to slam her palm on the glass and scream that she was the one they should be treating like a VIP, that they'd roll out a red carpet if she looked different, dressed different. But she forced herself to stay calm. "Boone Strategic Partners is a recognized firm," she said, voice strained, "with an active account at this bank. You've handled our transfers before." Dina snorted again. "Well, we'll need to verify that, won't we?" She didn't move to verify anything. Instead, she glanced over Marilyn's shoulder and made a subtle nod. Clay followed her gaze and cracked a grin. Marilyn turned just in time to see a burly man in a cheap gray security uniform approaching. He was at least 6'4", with a shaved head and forearms the size of hams. His name tag read Warren Liddell. He stopped a foot from Marilyn and squared his shoulders like a wall being built on the spot. "Problem here?" he asked, but he didn't look at Dina or Clay. He only looked at Marilyn. Dina's voice switched to false sweetness. "Yes, Warren, we may need some help. She's being difficult." Marilyn's jaw dropped. "I'm not being difficult," she hissed, too loud, feeling the heat in her face ignite into anger at last. But it was too late. The lobby had gone quiet. Customers had turned to watch again, even the ones who'd tried to ignore it before. A little boy asked his mother what was happening. The mother shushed him and tugged him closer. Warren set his hands on his belt in a pose that was clearly meant to intimidate. "Ma'am," he rumbled, "we'll need to clear this area if you're going to be disruptive." Marilyn's voice cracked despite her effort to keep it calm. "Executive of what, a hair salon? Don't waste our time." She'd grown up fighting those assumptions, in classrooms where teachers questioned her reading level even as she aced exams, in boardrooms where her voice was talked over until she forced them to listen. But she told herself that money was supposed to shield her from this now. She had worked for that address on her ID, for the authority to sign off on multi-million-dollar transfers, for the confidence to walk into any bank and say move this money without fear that someone would demand her pay stubs like she was a liar or a con artist. But here she was, stuck against the wall, clutching the tote that held all the correct paperwork, the documentation no one wanted to even pretend to read. She watched Dina and Clay huddle at the far end of the counter, whispering, glancing over, smirking, and then laughing outright. She couldn't hear the words, but she knew them in her bones. The customers who had been watching so openly tried to look away now, eyes dropping to their phones or the floor, unwilling to engage or interrupt, unwilling to be implicated. She realized with a dull, cold ache in her chest that even the teenage girl who'd filmed the first confrontation had stopped. No one wanted to see her fight. They wanted her to lose quietly. She tried to clear the tremor from her voice before she spoke, addressing the security guard as evenly as she could manage. "Can you at least tell them it's urgent? This isn't personal money, it's corporate. It's time sensitive." Warren didn't look at her, eyes trained dead ahead. "Not my job, ma'am." She swallowed. "Can you ask them to hurry? Please." He shifted slightly, jaw ticking, then shrugged without commitment. "They'll call you if they want you." The words stung more for how casually he said them. Dismissive of any urgency she tried to impress upon him. She closed her eyes for a second, trying to suppress the wave of panic. Every minute mattered. She imagined her boss's face if she had to call and explain the funds didn't move because the bank wouldn't process them in time. She forced herself to straighten, shoulders back, determined not to cry when the door beside her swung open sharply and nearly clipped her arm. She jerked away on instinct, the movement catching Warren's attention, just as a deep voice sliced across the lobby. "What's going on here?" The voice was low, authoritative, with a hint of exhaustion, and everyone in the bank seemed to snap to attention. Branch manager Otis McCready had arrived. He was an older man, early 60s with silver at his temples, and a thick gut pressing against the buttons of his suit jacket. His eyes were small and hard, and they flicked first at Warren, then at Marilyn, narrowing almost immediately. He didn't even bother to hide the annoyance as he strode over, each step deliberate. Wise security involved, he demanded, but the question was rhetorical. Dina and Clay looked smug. Warren cleared his throat. She was being disruptive. Marilyn felt her mouth go dry. She opened it to argue, but Otis turned on her before she could say a word. "Disruptive how?" She tried to answer anyway. "I wasn't disruptive. I was just asking them to process the paperwork. It's a corporate transfer." She felt every second drag on like an hour. She didn't dare speak or move because the last time she tried, Warren, the security guard, had tensed like she might throw a punch, barking at her to stand back and stay calm. She wasn't going to give them any excuse to claim she was violent, angry, unruly. The words people use to justify treating someone like trash while pretending it was policy. She kept quiet, eyes on the floor, feeling the humiliating heat in her face as she listened to Clay and Dina laugh over the next customer's paperwork. She caught Dina's voice, too loud to be private, dripping with smug amusement. God, she really thought she was someone. Executive puffed. Clay snorted, not bothering to keep his voice down either. Yeah, big shot in her Walmart outfit. Can you imagine? A man in line chuckled softly under his breath, just enough that he probably thought she couldn't hear, but she heard every note of it. She felt like she'd been stripped naked in the middle of the bank, all the carefully earned authority and dignity she wore like armor ripped away and tossed in the trash at their feet. Warren shifted beside her, and she heard the rustle of his security radio. He thumbed the mic and spoke in a slow, deliberate voice that was meant to carry. "Yeah, we have a possible fraud in progress at the front counter. Keep the channel open." His words echoed in the space like a gunshot. The line froze for a second, eyes darting to Marilyn before quickly looking away again. A mother pulled her daughter closer by the shoulders and whispered something in her ear. A man in a blue suit checked his watch and shook his head, muttering unbelievable, as if she'd personally inconvenienced his day by existing. Clay didn't bother to hide his smirk as he watched the exchange, then turned back to Dina with a conspiratorial roll of his eyes. She snickered, scanning the lobby like she was proud of the show she was putting on. Marilyn wanted to scream at them, wanted to demand to see every receipt for their humanity, wanted to say something so cutting and devastating it would flay them raw in front of everyone. But her mouth felt dry and useless. She could only swallow, throat clicking painfully, and squeeze the folder tighter. willing herself not to break. She had never felt so small. She tried to tell herself this wasn't her fault, that she was a professional, that she belonged here as much as anyone else. But the lies felt thin and useless against the reality in front of her. Her ears were ringing, and she wasn't sure if it was from anger or embarrassment or the suffocating effort it took to hold herself together. She didn't notice Otis returning at first. She was too busy trying not to look at anyone, to keep the fury tamped down beneath the suffocating weight of humiliation. But she felt the change in the room. The way the tellers straightened slightly, the customers shifted like school kids when the principal walked in. Otis didn't even glance her way at first. He was talking to another teller, Mark. She thought his name was, a skinny young man with a pale face and a tie that was too tight at the neck. She didn't hear all of it, but she caught enough to know it was about her. Otis's voice was low, but not low enough to keep it private. She's clearly not our clientele. Let her wait all day if she wants. Don't rush anything for her. Mark nodded quickly, eyes flicking nervously in Marilyn's direction before looking away again, focusing on his screen with almost comic intensity. Otis kept going, voice dry and dismissive. If she's legit, which I doubt, she can try another branch. Not my problem. He didn't even bother to hide the curl of disgust on his lip when he finally did glance at her. It wasn't even anger, it was boredom, like she wasn't even worth hating. He patted Mark's shoulder, muttered something she couldn't hear, and walked off toward the back offices again without another word. His authority restoring the bank's normal rhythm, like a conductor restarting an orchestra. She caught her own reflection in the shiny tile floor, puffy red eyes, curls escaping her frizzy bun in wild tufts, the faded navy t-shirt looking even more threadbare under the harsh fluorescence. Every detail screamed out her failure to belong. She swallowed, throat clicking, then tried to clear it to ask again if someone would just review the documents. But before she could speak, Dina reappeared, striding from the back hallway with all the self-importance of a queen returning to her court. Her heels clicked sharply on the tile, commanding attention. Marilyn's heart sank at the sight of the smirk on Dina's face. She didn't have to hear it to know what was coming, but Dina wasn't going to make it quiet. No, this was going to be loud. This was going to be final. Dina didn't even bother with a greeting. She simply stopped in front of Marilyn, thumbed the shiny badge pinned to her vest like it was a sheriff's star, and raised her voice just enough to ensure the entire lobby heard her pronouncement. Marilyn Boone, she said with exaggerated formality, like reading a name off a wanted poster. After reviewing your behavior and documentation, Jefferson State Bank is exercising its right to close your account for security reasons. Marilyn felt the words hit her like a punch. She opened her mouth, voice hoarse. What? You can't. But Dina cut her off, shaking her head with mock pity. We're well within our rights, ma'am. Fraudulent or suspicious activity triggers immediate account review and closure. It's policy. You're welcome, she added with sugar-laced poison, to reapply elsewhere. I'd suggest a smaller institution that caters to your needs. She paused deliberately before handing over a thin slip of paper, a stark, bureaucratic dagger. Account closure notice. Suspicious activity flagged. The words were printed in bold letters with her name typed neatly at the top, as if this humiliation had been prepared in advance. The tears threatened again, hot and unstoppable, her throat closing around the taste of bile as she took the slip in shaking fingers. She tried to speak, to protest, but no sound came. She heard the silence in the lobby deepen, that awful, suffocating hush that told her they were all watching, all listening, some with pity, many with satisfaction. Dina didn't wait for a thank you. She simply turned on her heel and sauntered back toward the counters, flicking her wrist dismissively at Warren. Take care of this, will you? She called back over her shoulder. Warren didn't hesitate. He stepped closer, his bulk eclipsing the sterile white lobby light like a storm cloud blotting out the sun. All right, ma'am, he said, voice like gravel over glass. You're going to need to move along now. Marilyn's eyes widened, and for a second she thought she might actually fall over. Please, she croaked, voice shredded. This is a mistake. It's time sensitive. It's not my money. It's corporate. They'll lose the deal. But Warren didn't care. His hand hovered at her elbow without touching, The threat implied more clearly than any grip. "I'm not going to ask again. You're leaving. Now." She felt herself shaking all over. Her fingers clutched the tote, so tight she thought the seams would rip. She tried to step sideways to plead with Dina, with Clay, with anyone, but Warren shifted smoothly, blocking her path with an immovable wall of muscle and scuffed security uniform. She opened her mouth, but the words cracked, died. Her legs moved on autopilot. It was cheap, standard printer paper with an official header designed to make it seem like policy, not personal. But the truth was there in every letter, the accusation laid bare. It wasn't policy, it was punishment. Her punishment for existing in that space, wearing those clothes, having that skin. Her punishment for daring to ask for the same service any other client would have taken for granted. The tears were dry on her cheeks now, leaving sticky tracks that tightened uncomfortably whenever she tried to speak. She coughed once, the sound harsh and ragged in her throat, her chest aching with the effort of breathing around the weight that sat on it like a slab of stone. She lifted her eyes from the paper and turned just enough to see through the glass door of the bank. Inside, it was bright and sterile, cool the way only air-conditioned places could be, clean in that artificially welcoming corporate way with potted plants and carefully curated posters of smiling families who clearly never had days like this. And there they were, Clay leaning back in his chair, throwing his head back in laughter. She couldn't hear the sound anymore, but she saw the shape of his mouth, the twist of his grin. Dina glancing over at him, eyes glittering with shared victory, offering a little shake of her head as if to say, "Can you believe her?" Customers were moving on. The man in the blue suit who'd muttered unbelievable earlier was now being helped with a bright, professional smile. The line had returned to normal. Transactions continued. For them, the disruption was over. She was out. Problem solved. Marilyn turned back toward the street, feeling the hot wind whip a curl free from her bun so it slapped against her damp cheek. She let it stick there. She didn't bother brushing it away. She couldn't summon the energy. The sidewalk around her pulsed with city life. Cars idling at the light, honking horns, people stepping around her without looking, the occasional shout of a vendor selling roasted peanuts from a cart on the corner. It was all so normal, so absurdly, mockingly normal, while her entire sense of self felt like it was cracking apart. She squeezed the paper tighter until the edge cut into her palm, leaving a sharp white line that slowly turned pink with blood. It felt grounding in a sick way, real, unavoidable. She blinked and tried to breathe. She had to think. She had to remember who she was, because this wasn't supposed to happen. Not to her. Not anymore. She forced herself to inhale, ragged though it was. She looked down at the slip again. Account closed. Suspicious. That word burned worst of all. It was the same word they'd used when she was 10, caught walking alone through a department store with $3 in her pocket, being followed by security. It was the word they used when her high school counselor suggested she aim lower with her college applications because you need to be realistic. It was the word she saw on every banker's face the first time she tried to open an account for her small consultancy. Suspicious. She let the tears rise again, but this time she didn't bother wiping them away. She let them streak her cheeks, drip off her chin, spatter on the paper. It was hers now. Let them see it if they bothered to look out from their air-conditioned palace of contempt. But of course, they didn't. She turned her head one last time to see if anyone was watching. Warren, the security guard, was still near the door, arms folded, watching her with a look that was less hostility now and more bored duty, as if she were trash he'd taken out that might try to crawl back in. Dina wasn't even glancing outside. Clay was busy charming some older couple in matching cardigans. They didn't even know she was still there. Or worse, they didn't care. She exhaled hard, a shaking, ugly sound that might have been half laugh, half sob. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, smearing sweat and tears in a single grimy stroke. And then she spoke, but only to herself, voice so quiet it was almost lost to the rumble of the street. I warned them. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even satisfied. It was exhausted. The last vestige of a promise she'd made to herself years ago, when she'd sworn no one would ever make her feel small without consequence again. She reached into the tote bag and pulled out her phone with fingers that shook so badly she nearly dropped it. The screen lit up, fingerprints smudged, blinking a missed call from her assistant. She'd have to apologize later. She wiped her thumb across the glass, unlocking it. Her contacts loaded slowly, as if even the phone hesitated at what she was about to do. It had been a long day, filled with small crises, irate customers, and the exhausting sense of authority that came with reminding everyone who was in charge. He deserved a moment of quiet, but even as he exhaled and settled in, his mind flickered to the scene that afternoon. The woman, Marilyn something, standing out front with tears on her face, clutching the account closure notice like it was the only thing keeping her upright. He had told himself at the time it wasn't personal. It was policy. She had been belligerent, disrespectful, suspicious. They had every right. He tried to remember exactly what she'd said, her voice cracking as she begged them to move the money, claimed it was for some urgent corporate deal. He snorted quietly in the dark. She really thought she could just walk in off the street in that outfit, with that attitude, and demand they process millions of dollars on her word alone? He felt no guilt. She'd been put in her place. She wouldn't forget it, and that was as it should be. His eyelids drifted lower, the quiet tempting him toward a nap. But before he could relax, his office phone rang, piercing the silence like a scream. He jumped, heart thumping, and fumbled for the receiver, pressing it to his ear with an irritated grunt. "McCready here." The voice on the other end was tight, clipped, unfamiliar. "Branch Manager Otis McCready." Otis straightened, frowning. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Regional Oversight. You're to remain at your desk. There's an urgent call scheduled in 5 minutes. Check your email for the link. It's mandatory. Don't make us call again." The line went dead before he could protest. He felt a flicker of indignation. How dare they talk to him like that? But it died quickly, replaced by unease. He turned to his computer and woke it up, the screen blazing with the glow of his inbox, where the subject line stood out in bold letters. Critical. Mandatory video call for Branch 217. He clicked it open, jaw tightening as he read the terse instructions. He didn't even have time to think about ignoring it. He clicked the link, heart rate picking up. The screen filled with the corporate video conferencing platform, and slowly one by one the tiles blinked to life. Faces from other branches appeared. Other managers, assistant managers, regional supervisors, a few corporate compliance officers whose names he only vaguely recognized. They looked just as confused and tired as he felt. Otis cleared his throat and tried to school his expression into one of calm, professional readiness. He didn't know what this was about, but he had no intention of looking rattled in front of them. Then the corporate logo flashed, and the call moderator's voice boomed over the line. "Attention. Everyone, mute your mics and turn on cameras. This is an emergency meeting." The chatter fell silent. Otis watched as the grid of faces stilled. No one dared speak. The moderator continued. "This meeting concerns a high-level compliance breach and reputational incident that occurred today at Branch 217. Otis felt his skin prickle. Branch 217. His branch. He swallowed and forced himself not to react. The moderator's voice was steely, professional, but the tension was unmistakable. "We have received a formal complaint of discrimination and unprofessional conduct, leading to the closure of a long-term corporate account. This is not a drill. Corporate ethics is taking over this review, effective immediately." Otis felt the color drain from his face. Around the screen, he could see other managers shooting him looks, curiosity mixing with wariness. He opened his mouth to protest, to demand context, but the moderator cut in before he could unmute. "Please direct your attention to the presenting party." The screen shifted, the corporate logo vanishing, replaced by a single tile that expanded to fill the entire frame. It was a conference room somewhere downtown, sleek and cold, with high-backed leather chairs and minimalist art. And at the head of the table sat the woman from earlier. Otis's breath caught. She wasn't in her cheap t-shirt anymore. She wore a dark tailored blazer over a simple blouse, hair smoothed into a precise bun, face scrubbed clean of tears. Her eyes were clear, focused, hard as diamond. The title that appeared on the screen under her video feed made Otis's stomach churn. Dr. Marilyn Boone, Chair of Corporate Ethics. She didn't smile. She didn't raise her voice. When she spoke, it was calm, deliberate, with the unshakable authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Good evening," she began. "For those who don't know me, and clearly some of you don't, I'm Dr. Marilyn Boone, Chair of Corporate Ethics, and acting majority shareholder of this bank's parent corporation, Boone Strategic Holdings. My family's trust-acquired controlling interest last month. I wasn't planning on introducing myself so publicly yet, but circumstances made that necessary." The silence in the call was absolute. Otis couldn't breathe. She continued, flipping a sheet of paper in front of her with a dismissive flick. "Earlier today, I attempted to complete a time-sensitive corporate transaction at Branch 217. Instead, I was subjected to open hostility, discriminatory screening, and public humiliation in clear violation of our stated client service policies and anti-bias commitments. When I asked for assistance, I was dismissed, degraded, and finally had my account closed for suspicious activity." Otis felt sweat bead on his upper lip. He wiped it quickly, eyes darting to the corners of the screen where other managers were now staring at him with thinly veiled horror. Marilyn didn't slow down. He watched her adjust the folder in front of her with clinical precision, a neat stack of printed transcripts peeking from beneath her hand. When she spoke, her voice was low but perfectly clear, like a scalpel cutting away any pretense. "Before we continue, I'd like to present the evidence in question. This is pulled directly from Branch 217 security footage earlier today." She didn't turn for effect or wait for questions. She nodded once to someone off-screen. The view on the video call changed instantly. The camera feed split, and a grainy black-and-white bank security video appeared in a large tile, pushing the faces of every manager and executive into smaller, grim-looking boxes along the side. Otis swallowed hard. The footage wasn't even edited. It was raw direct. It showed Marilyn herself standing at the teller window in her navy t-shirt and old jeans, handing over her ID. Clay's face was perfectly visible, his smirk clear, the way he held her ID up like evidence. The audio was crisp enough to capture every word. "You sure you live there? Looks unexpected." The call remained silent. Marilyn didn't say anything on the live feed, but the video kept playing. It showed Dina sauntering over, taking the ID with 2 fingers like it was contaminated. "Executive of what exactly? A hair salon? Don't waste our time." Otis heard the sharp intake of breath on the call from a few managers who hadn't known all the details. He felt his own face flush hot, sweat gathering at the back of his neck. He remembered standing just off to the side that day, arms crossed, thinking he was in the right, watching her crumble without lifting a finger to help. The video shifted to show Warren, the security guard, stepping in close, looming over her. His voice was perfectly audible. "We'll need to clear this area if you're going to be difficult." Otis watched his own figure appear in the frame next, stepping into view, frowning, snatching the folder from Marilyn's hands without ceremony. He saw himself hand it back in 1 second, barking out, "We reserve the right to refuse suspicious transactions." Heard himself say it in that exact dismissive tone that had seemed so justified at the time. Then the moment that made him feel physically sick. Marilyn's voice, thin and shaking, but unmistakably clear. "Please. It's a time-sensitive corporate transfer." His reply, dripping with condescension. "You think we're transferring that much money for you? You're funny. Try a check cashing place." He heard the muffled laughter from the lobby, the scattered snickers, the man in the suit muttering unbelievable. And then, the worst part, the camera angle catching Marilyn's face as she turned away, eyes bright with tears she fought to hold back, lip trembling. The clip didn't end there. It followed her as Dina returned with a printed closure notice. The words "account closed for suspicious activity" visible in bold black letters, even in the grainy feed. Dina's voice rang out perfectly. "You're welcome to reapply elsewhere. I'd suggest a smaller institution that caters to your needs." The call remained dead silent. Dozens of little video tiles filled with motionless faces that couldn't look away from the screen even if they wanted to. Otis felt sick, but it wasn't sympathy. It was fear. Cold, creeping, stomach-turning fear that wormed its way up from his gut to clench around his throat. He had known it was bad. He hadn't realized it was this damning. The final seconds of the footage showed Warren physically ushering Marilyn out, the door slamming shut behind her as she staggered on the sidewalk, her body visibly shaking. Through the glass, Clay's laughter was visible, his mouth forming the words, "Well, that scared her off," the customers nearby laughing along. The video froze on the image of Marilyn outside the branch, alone, shoulders hunched, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. The screen went dark. The video call returned to the grid of faces, every single manager and supervisor now staring at Marilyn Boonescom, poised form in the central tile. She didn't rush. She didn't clear her throat or fumble with notes. She just let the silence linger, stretching it taut enough to snap. When she finally spoke, her voice was unshakable, perfectly modulated, carrying the weight of truth and authority in equal measure. "This," she said quietly, "is how you treat your customers." She let it hang there. Otis wanted to look away, but couldn't. She continued, voice sharpening to something like a blade. "This is how you treat a woman who walked in with full corporate authorization, whose company held one of your largest commercial accounts. This is how you chose to treat the chair of corporate ethics and the controlling shareholder of your entire institution." She paused again, scanning the screen as if she could see each of them individually. Otis felt her eyes on him even though it wasn't possible. She didn't have to point him out. Everyone knew. He felt their eyes on him now, judging, condemning, recoiling. She flipped a single page on her desk and laid it flat with a soft thump. "This is not just a breach of policy," she continued, voice gaining force. "This is a breach of trust, of professionalism, and of the most basic human decency. It is, frankly, a breach of morality." She didn't raise her voice once. She didn't need to. Otis heard the hush over the line deepen until he could hear someone breathing too hard on their mic. The call ended not with a bang, but with an icy, silent severing. The corporate logo replacing Dr. Marilyn Boone's unflinching gaze as the meeting disconnected them all at once. No time for frantic explanations or half-baked apologies. Otis McCready sat at his desk for long minutes afterward, staring at the blank screen, the cheap webcam's tiny green light extinguished, the reflection of his own slack, horrified face in the dark glass of the monitor. His heart slammed so hard in his chest he thought it might crack a rib. He felt sweat dripping from his hairline, cooling on his skin in the still, conditioned air of the office. He didn't bother wiping it away. For the first time in years, he felt small in this place, like the room itself had shrunk around him, pressing him in at the shoulders until he couldn't breathe. He tried to tell himself for hours that day that he was doing his job, enforcing policy, making sure the bank was secure. But the footage left no room for that lie anymore. Even he had been forced to see himself as the camera did, leaning over her, sneering, barking refusal without even reading her papers, dismissing her with that casual cruelty that was worse than overt hate because it cost him nothing to inflict. He remembered the way her voice cracked when she pleaded with him. He hadn't even paused. And now the entire company had seen it, seen him. The first email alert snapped him out of a stupor, the bright notification window flashing with aggressive urgency. Subject: urgent HR action required. He opened it with shaking fingers. It was a form letter, but there was no mistaking the message. He was suspended pending investigation for violation of corporate policy and ethics standards. Effective immediately. He would not be paid during the review. His pension would be frozen pending the outcome of misconduct hearings. He read it 3 times before the words stopped making sense. He tried to stand, but his knees didn't want to cooperate. He heard voices outside his office door, Clay's nasal whine rising in panic, Dina's brittle, furious retort, Warren's growl of disbelief. He wasn't the only one. Another notification popped up, then another, then another. The entire branch staff was being purged in one swift, brutal maneuver. HR had sent them all the same note. He wasn't sure if it was better or worse that he wasn't alone. He pushed himself up, hands trembling against the desktop. He opened the door slowly and peered out. Clay was at his station, red-faced, hair mussed, eyes shiny with tears he was trying and failing to hide. He was punching his keyboard, muttering, "No, no, no," over and over like it was a prayer. Dina was on the phone with someone in HR, voice straining to stay calm, but rising to a shriek. "I have been here 15 years. You can't just no listen to me." Warren was pacing in slow, tight circles near the door, security radio dangling uselessly at his side. His expression stuck somewhere between confusion and seething rage. No one looked at Otis. No one wanted to. They had all seen the footage too. They all knew there was no defense left to make. He shut the door again gently, like closing a coffin lid. But the blows didn't stop. The company's internal network lit up with statement after statement. Corporate ethics had ordered a sweeping review of all customer interactions at the branch. The compliance team would arrive in person the next day to conduct interviews and secure evidence. Staff badges were being deactivated at midnight. There would be no second chances. Otis sat back down slowly, his eyes roaming his office, taking in the pictures of award ceremonies, the framed certificates of appreciation for excellent service, the tenure plaque, the congratulatory letter from the regional VP. It all looked like someone else's stuff now, like it belonged to a stranger who might have deserved it once. He felt old in a way he hadn't before. Tired, beat. He closed his eyes, and all he could see was Marilyn Boone's face. Not the part where she looked afraid, where her lip quivered as she tried to hold in tears, but the part where she'd leaned forward in that meeting, voice cold and even, and told them all, "This is how you treat your customers. And now your employer." He didn't even try to lie to himself about her anymore. She had given him exactly what he deserved. And it wasn't just the staff who paid. Outside the bank's walls, the entire institution reeled. The press picked it up almost immediately. A junior associate in legal had leaked the internal meeting footage to a reporter within an hour of the call ending. Too disgusted to keep quiet. By 10 that night, news websites had front-page stories headlined, "Bank executives humiliate black investor, face mass firing." By 11, social media was ablaze with hashtags. Hashtag banking while black, hashtag corporate racism, hashtag justice for Marilyn Boone. Screenshots of Dina's words circulated like poison. Clips of Clay's mocking laughter played on repeat, the text captions spelling out every slur. The footage of Marilyn on the sidewalk, crying and clutching her closure notice, went viral with millions of views. The CEO issued a carefully worded public apology just before midnight, reading solemnly from a teleprompter on national TV while the company's logo hovered in the background like an accusation. He promised accountability, training, a new era of inclusion. No one seemed convinced. Months passed in the cold shadow of scandal that had consumed Jefferson State Bank like a fire in a dry forest, reducing everything Otis McCready had built for himself to blackened ruin. He had spent those first weeks in a kind of numb stupor, waking up each morning in a quiet house that felt smaller than before, watching the sun rise through dusty blinds without really seeing it. He remembered telling himself that it was all Marilyn's fault, that she had overreacted, humiliated him on purpose to make some kind of statement. But that lie had fallen apart slowly, crumbling like the stock price on the tickers he used to watch so religiously. He had no job to go to now, no staff to manage, no title to remind anyone of his authority. His severance had been withheld pending lawsuits. The pension he'd taken for granted was under review. At night, he sat at his kitchen table in silence while his wife cooked with her back to him, the air thick with words neither wanted to say. Even his children had grown cautious around him, their casual teenage sarcasm replaced with tense, careful silence, as though they could smell the shame on him and didn't want it to rub off. The bank itself had nearly imploded, saved only by a forced merger that meant new leadership, new policies, new slogans about justice and equity that felt too late to matter. And even then, it hadn't been enough to erase the stain of what he and his branch had done. But Otis still had time. He had days, endless unstructured days. And that was how he ended up here, 6 months later, standing in a cramped, underfunded community center in a part of town he'd always tried to avoid, handing out tattered paperbacks to restless kids in a literacy program. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't pay. but it was something. A way to fill the time that didn't involve pacing his living room in circles like a caged animal. He didn't know if it was enough to make amends. He wasn't sure if he even deserved to try. But when he handed a book to a little girl who looked at him with frank suspicion, he found himself saying softly, "You can read this on your own. I know you can." He almost believed it himself. When the session ended, he washed his hands at the rusty old sink and glanced up at the community bulletin board above it, plastered with local announcements, missing pet notices, event flyers. His eyes stopped on a faded poster with a corporate logo he recognized even though the name had changed after the merger. The photo was old but unmistakable. Marilyn Boone, in a simple suit, her expression serious but kind, standing next to a smiling group of students. The text read, "Major donor, thank you for investing in our future." He felt something shift painfully in his chest. He stood there for a long moment, reading her name again and again. He remembered her eyes in that meeting, not gloating, not raging, just cold with disappointment as she said, "This is how you treat your customers. And now your employer." He realized how much smaller he felt now than even in that moment. He wiped his hands on a threadbare paper towel and turned away before anyone could see the hot sting behind his eyes. Meanwhile, in a small second-floor apartment on the other side of town, Marilyn Boone sat at her desk, surrounded by neat piles of folders, contracts, and the constant glow of incoming messages on her phone. It had been half a year since the withdrawal that had gutted the bank, 6 months since she'd made the call that had cost them billions in corporate accounts, turned their stock toxic, and forced a reckoning none of them had been prepared for. But it hadn't ended with the headlines. That part had been easy. What was harder was what came next. She hadn't walked away from the mess she'd created. She'd spent the months sitting in meetings with new leadership, drafting anti-bias protocols, rebuilding relationships with communities the bank had neglected for decades. She'd signed off on donation drives and loan forgiveness programs for local nonprofits and small businesses. She'd insisted on mandatory training that didn't come with a certificate for showing up but required real proof of change. And she'd read the letters, hundreds of them, from employees who had been fired, from those who had kept their jobs but felt complicit, from customers who told her they'd been too afraid to speak up about what happened to them. She read every word. She made herself. The envelope on her desk tonight was smaller than most. It was unremarkable on the outside, just a plain white standard mailer with blocky handwriting that had tried too hard to be neat. She slid it open with her letter opener, eyes skimming quickly, breath catching on the first line. "Ms. Boone, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I want you to know I was wrong. I thought I was being funny. I thought I was doing my job. But I saw myself on that video and realized I wasn't even human in that moment. I treated you like you didn't belong anywhere. I see it now. I'm sorry. Clay Dorsey." She closed her eyes for a moment. She hadn't thought about him in weeks. She hadn't wanted to. But here it was, blunt and raw in its own pathetic way. Not a good apology, but not a fake one either. She set the letter down carefully, folding it once, twice, pressing the crease with her thumb. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk and placed it in a folder marked change. The label was new. It didn't have many letters in it yet, but she was determined it would grow. She closed the drawer, her fingers lingering on the handle. Then she reached for her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the new HR director. She typed out a message. "Consider this official approval for Clay Dorsey's reapplication. Entry level only. Mandatory bias training required." She paused. She added one last line. "Tell him this is his one chance." She hit send and set the phone down, exhaling slowly. Outside her window, the city was dark, lit with the glow of streetlights and the hush of traffic. She watched the lights for a moment, her face unreadable in the reflection. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't crying either. She tapped the glass once with a fingertip like a promise to herself, or maybe a warning. Then she turned back to her work. The end. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more like it, be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. What did you think of this plot? Did the ending surprise you? Was there a moment that hit hardest? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts and where you're watching from today. Your feedback helps shape what comes next.